everybody, to our Arcview Access webinar on the global evolution of medical marijuana. My name is Louis Hahn, VP of Operations here at the Arcview Group. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, the Arcview Group is the oldest and largest investor network in the cannabis space. Since 2010, we have been the connecting point between cannabis entrepreneurs and investors. And this year, we're excited to have expanded our services to include management consulting, a FINRA-registered broker-dealer, and a venture capital arm under Arcview Ventures. You can learn more about us at arcviewgroup.com or our social channels at Arcview Group. I'm very excited to have this international conversation about the evolution of medical cannabis around the world. As I'm sure many of you listening know, cannabis is one of the few emerging novel industries that actually isn't as new as some people think. Humans have been using cannabis as medicine for millennia. And in light of it being Guinness World Record Day today, fun fact, the earliest collection of written articles about medicinal herbs and plants was written by a Greek surgeon in 77 AD and included cannabis in its writings. This book remained the authority on medicinal plants for over 1,500 years. It's only recently in human history, especially with the United Nations Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1961, that the world got together and decided that cannabis is not medicine anymore. In the last 60 years, though, we as a community have proven that in the war on drugs, drugs won. More and more countries are enabling patient access to medical cannabis, proving that our favorite plant does have therapeutic and medicinal value. For many of us, this isn't a legalization movement, but a re-legalization movement. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our three experts who can crystal ball a glimpse into what the future of medical cannabis around the world will look like. These experts are deeply entrenched in countries that have taken national stances on medical cannabis, unlike the United States, which does dismay me as an American. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce Jake Kuzaruk, VP of Business Development here at the Arcview Group, and Isaac Bach, VP at AlphaRoot, for Jake's Sponsor Corner. Jake and Isaac, over to you.
Isaac, thanks for joining us today. A regular fixture around these parts. I love it. I know our audience would love to hear this in your own words, but please give us a full rundown on AlphaRoot and the services you provide for the cannabis industry.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having us. It's been great to be on a few of these with you guys, so appreciate asking us back and glad to be a part of this one. High-level overview, though, AlphaRoot is a full-service insurance brokerage and risk management firm that focuses particularly in the cannabis, hemp, and CBD space. So we help not only place insurance policies for our clients, but we also help them with all of their risk management related needs to make sure that they're operating safely and getting the most favorable insurance premiums possible.
Excellent. Arguably the most important part of this business is managing risk. Now tell us, who's kind of an appropriate fit for AlphaRoot? Kind of walk me through what a target client would be, ideal traction, what regions you specialize in. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, no problem at all. So we actually, we don't discriminate here. We'll work with anyone from your smallest, mom and pop CBD shops and brand only companies, all the way through publicly traded MSOs that are traded in Canada and operate throughout the U.S. and a number of other countries. So as you can imagine, we do have a lot of California clients, but what we've seen a lot of is, the Massachusetts and New England area has become a key location for us. Our biggest client is actually based in Massachusetts with some operations in Ohio and Pennsylvania. And then us being based in New York, New Jersey coming online as of November 3rd was huge news. So that will definitely be a target area for us as well.
We are similarly ecstatic about New Jersey. We're going to do a town hall on the 9th to even talk about it in greater detail. But yeah, we have the ventures team, the capital team, everyone's out there in New York. The East Coast is blowing up and it's just beginning. Fun one here, but what are some of the strangest products or most unique brands you've worked with? I'm sure you've insured some interesting projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the one that's gotten the most commentary, not only within our office, but also with our underwriting partners, has been a company which specializes in CBD-based intimate products. So as you can imagine, some older school insurance underwriters might not be as open to those conversations. So having those conversations and discussing the potential claims that could come out of it have caused some laughs in our office, and it's been fun to work on to try to come up with a reasonably priced solution for that client.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's a unique one to say the least. And I'm sure it's only going to become a more complex space as the years go on. Now, when is the right time to connect with Alpharoot, and how does the process unfold?
Yeah, so truthfully, what we've kind of prided ourselves on is we do a lot of initial calls that aren't necessarily sales calls. We're doing more of a consultative approach. So we're not necessarily looking to be the broker of record right away. We'll review companies' current policies and make sure that they're properly insured. If there's an area we see needs to be fixed, we'll address that. Now, in terms of buying insurance and utilizing us as a broker, it's kind of two different timelines we would focus on. One, if you are a first-time insurance buyer looking to purchase a new product, we would say, reach out at least a month before you need the policy. Give us some time, just because these sort of have a longer tail than your traditional placements for more widely accepted business models in the insurance industry. And then for our current clients, we're a year-round advisor and partner for them, but we typically start our renewal process at least 120 days out, make sure that we have all the information we need before going out to market for the renewals.
I love it. You're consultative. You're a friend in need when the kitchen's burning down at midnight. Well, walk me through how the Arcview community can assist, and what are the core needs for Alpharoot?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we've loved about working with you guys now on a few of these is just the access to additional members in the space who are looking to take a more holistic approach from an ancillary model. We want to be able to point our clients to real professionals in the space, whether it's on the legal side, licensing side, things of that nature. We want to be able to have connections with those individuals and not just point our client in one direction and not really know who we're recommending. So that's been one of the greatest things about, working with you guys and through the network. And then obviously meeting your investors through the group there. If our clients are looking for capital, definitely a good resource to have for them as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a small industry, and needless to say, your network defines you. So it's important to obviously approach that with care. And we're so happy to be able to help you guys continue to scale. Now, to close out, before we get there, can you run through some of the associations or communities that you're a part of?
Yeah. So, one of the things we're really proud of and we're working on currently, just have to get around some insurance regulations, is a partnership with the Last Prisoners Project, finding a way to work with them and give back to a group that has been doing a lot of great work in the space and obviously expanding the availability of access to this industry. The other, aspect is we're a member of the Trailblazers community, which we actually had a chance to meet Kim in October out in Ojai. So, that's a great community, a lot of great people, and, thought leaders in the space are part of that. And then on the insurance front, we're members of the National Cannabis Risk Management Association, have a great relationship with Rocco and the team over there. One of my partners, Drew, is one of the broker board members. So we're very tied in there as well.
We love Rocco, Arcview member, and he continues to scale into new areas. I love hearing that. Trailblazers, I really wish I was there for that golf outing, but there'll be one next year, hopefully. To close out, what is the best way to get in touch with you? And please recap any offers you're running for our network.
Yeah, absolutely. So best way to reach out is info@alpharoot.co. You can also reach out to me directly. I believe Jake also has our white paper, which is just kind of a high-level overview of the insurance industry for the cannabis space, which will be needing some updating come January 1. So we'll work through that. And then in terms of offers we're running, unfortunately, we're not the underwriters, so we can't say we'll give reduced premiums, but we have looked to cut fees associated with the policies for Arcview members. So it's one way to give, some financial give back to the community as well, reduce some of the burden on that front.
No one likes paying fees, so we sincerely appreciate that. And excellent. Isaac, As always, thanks again for joining us. And just as a recap, info@alpharoot.co. That's what you need. And please, if you have any trouble, just let me know and I'll put you in touch with Isaac. All right, back to Lewis.
Thanks, Jake.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jake and Isaac. Really appreciate AlphaRoot's sponsorship today. We couldn't make this conversation happen without you. Now it's time to hear from our three experts in international medical cannabis, Larry LISSER from HelloMD, Ken WEISBROD from Shoppers Drug Mart, and Deepak Anand from Material Ventures. I'd like to first introduce Larry LISSER, CEO and founder at HelloMD, which is a leading digital provider of non-traditional healthcare services in the United States and Canada. Hey, Larry, how's it going?
Hey, Lewis, good to see you.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us. I have to say it's been such a shift from seeing each other at conferences that seemed like they were happening every other week to going fully virtual now. I remember one of the first times I met you in person was at a cannabis event in San Francisco 4 or 5 years ago. But cannabis has thankfully been deemed an essential industry in so much of the United States despite COVID. I mean, how much has COVID impacted your business?
And I should say, Lewis, I remember that. I also remember the first event I ever went to in medical cannabis was in an Arcview event in Las Vegas, I think in sometime 2015. So we've been around a long time. Thank you for having me and for having my guests today. We really appreciate it. You know, as to your question, look, I would imagine that everybody here has either experienced firsthand or has certainly observed the hypergrowth in tele or digital health that's been brought on by this pandemic. It's if you look across industries, it's a wave that is lifting many boats actually. But there's a subplot that we've been following along carefully, which is that for all the growth in telehealth, most of it continues to be centered around conventional healthcare. And it's happening at a time, coincidentally, where the trend towards alternative or more natural healthcare options like cannabis is also growing very quickly. In fact, I saw a stat the other day that said almost $100 billion was spent in the last year on complementary or alternative healthcare services. So today I like to think about our virtual business this way. We deliver the types of trusted advice and services people just cannot depend on their primary care provider for. And what do I mean by that is that try asking your primary care provider for advice on cannabis, asking them about whether you should have a vitamin B shot, or maybe more recently with the news, ask them whether a psychedelic might help with chronic anxiety. There may be an awkward pause in the conversation. We, on the other hand, have come to love these types of questions. So indeed, the pandemic has created a tremendous opportunity for us, and we're taking full advantage of it by making more out-of-the-box healthcare solutions available to more people in more places as we go ahead.
Awesome. Glad to hear HelloMD has been doing so well. We definitely want to dig into more of that during the audience Q&A at the end, but let's kick things off. I'll hand the mic over to you, Larry. Let's kick things off.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. So I've got Ken and Deepak with us, and I am going to just take a minute first to ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their own backgrounds, and then we'll jump in. So Deepak, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Larry, and thanks everyone at Arcview for putting this together. Very happy to be joining you today. My name is Deepak Anand. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Material Ventures. We're a global medical cannabis and CBD company that focuses on the supply chain. Super excited to kind of talk to you, not just about cannabis today, but more specifically about medical cannabis. I have a background prior to cannabis in pharmaceuticals, doing e-commerce, distribution and delivery to underinsured Americans via mail order. So quite a bit of synergies here between the pharmaceutical industry and the cannabis industry, and happy to be chatting today.
Thanks, and thanks for joining us, Deepak. It's always good to see you. Ken, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. I'm Ken WEISBROD. I'm in charge of the medical cannabis strategy and the cannabis strategy at Shoppers Drug Mart, Loblaws. We're the largest pharmacy chain in Canada. We've been involved in cannabis for over 7 years. We're the largest retailer in Canada also. So I think it's pretty safe to say we're the largest company in the world to embrace cannabis. So I'm excited to get into the discussion.
All right, and we appreciate you taking the time today, Ken. So before we jump in, I just want to expand a little bit on what Lewis said earlier. You know, today's conversation came together really thinking about the opportunity to discuss with more stateside investors and observers and operators, you know, what is happening around the world. Obviously, it's been very difficult for any of us to travel to any conferences, and otherwise that would have normally exposed us a little bit better to what's happening maybe in Canada or in Europe or otherwise. So today I asked these two to join us because I want to share a little bit about the impact of what, to Ken's point, of what happens when pharmacy enters medical cannabis, because that's something that is, quite still far off for what it's worth in the US. Deepak spends a ton of time in the European market, and I think it's fascinating to learn how those regulators and those entrepreneurs are thinking about those markets, some of the standards that are impacting other markets that are not yet impacting the US market, but could one day. And then we'll close talking a little bit about a big opportunity that I think we're still trying to figure out how to make the most of, which are seniors. And maybe if we have a minute or two, do a little crystal ball about where we think we'll be a couple of years from now. So we'll start with you, Ken. I think the year was 2013, which in cannabis years, that's like a century ago, you had the crazy idea to, that was even early, I should say, in the medical cannabis market in Canada. And you had the idea to bring pharmacy into it, that's really what you felt was the right thing to do to build out this market, both domestically and ultimately internationally a bit. So if you could just kind of take us back there and tell us, what was your vision and why, and then walk us a little bit through how you managed to actually get pharmacy to not only participate, but now take a really leading position in the Canadian medical cannabis market.
Great question, Larry. So medical cannabis patients in Canada have had a constitutional right to this drug for over 20 years. Back in 2012, the federal government at the time decided to create the industry that you see today in medical cannabis and cannabis in the country. I was actually at a meeting with a different portfolio at Health Canada and overheard two lawyers talking about the new cannabis legislation back in 2012. And about a week previous to that conversation, the Canadian Pharmacy Association decided to decline dispensing cannabis as the government was formulating these regulations. And I overheard this conversation, got back to my office in Toronto and walked into my CEO's office at the time. And back in those days, it wasn't cannabis, it was called marijuana. And said, listen, we need to discuss about something. And he took a seat and sat down, and I said, it's about marijuana. And you can imagine, the stigma back in those days, and it's still alive and well on my side of the world. But we had a really good discussion. And at the time, the Canadian Pharmacy Association declined because of that stigma. And it's a different organization today. And I went off, and when you think about chronic pain, insomnia, and anxiety, formulating a business case, I was the head of business development for Shoppers back in those days. It wasn't a pretty tough business case. I spent a lot of time in the illegal industry, understanding cannabis for a good 6 to 8 months, came back with a very compelling business case for us to be involved, really centered around our patients and very patient-centric company. And when you think about those large cohort of patients who are embracing this drug back in those days, it was really compelling for us to get involved. Shoot forward today, it's been over a 7-year journey. It took us a good 3 years to get our license. We have a medical sales license and a standard processing license. That means that we have the ability, if we choose to manufacture the drug or create control brands one day. So we're very robust and involved in the industry. We've also spent a lot of time advocating for pharmacy dispensing. Today, I manage the Medical Cannabis by Shoppers business unit. It's an e-commerce medical exchange for medical cannabis. And we do advocate strongly that we put this back into brick and mortar in our stores. So it's been quite an adventure.
I have two follow-up questions there. One is, those same people that you sat with 5, 7, 6, 7 years ago, what kind of progress have you seen in your building? I mean, it's a conservative environment. It's a multi-billion-dollar operation. What have you seen?
I think, listen, from the perspective of my company, I mean, we're a very innovative company. It's really a great place to be involved in. We were bought out by Loblaws back in 2014. So I've gone through that change in the company, and it was embraced by Loblaws that we continued. We have close to 2,000 stores across the country. We have trained our pharmacists in the stores. We have patients walking in every day asking about cannabis. We have an amazing call center staffed by Shoppers Drug Mart pharmacists. We're very involved in the industry. The Canadian Pharmacy Association changed their opinion many years ago with regards to cannabis being dispensed in the stores. We have provinces wanting to have pharmacy involved, so it's pretty cool place to be in right now, and I'm really encouraged by the changes over the last few years. And I mean, the stigma is still there, and you see it in the United States too, but we're really moving the dial. We've taken a real leadership role in cannabis and in medical cannabis.
Okay. Well, I just want to add that as someone who's had the opportunity to sit alongside you for a couple of years and work with Shoppers to onboard patients through our platform, it's been fascinating to observe, actually, because we operate in the U.S. and in Canada, as you know, and now increasingly these two markets look more and more different. And so, what we've seen, what I think all of us hoped for, is that by inserting a brand trustworthy like Shoppers and inserting pharmacy, which in itself begets trust, we have seen a completely wholesale change in the type of patients who are looking to take advantage of medical cannabis. They're older, not younger anymore. They're more female. Both groups who value trust in how they make purchasing decisions. And most importantly, they are increasingly patients who have complex current or health histories, and they're trying to find a solution outside of pharma to manage some of the symptoms associated with them. And for them, if it's good enough for a pharmacy, then it must be good enough for them. But prior to pharmacy entrance or Shoppers entrance, we just weren't seeing those patients. So I think you've had a lot of impact on the industry, perhaps nothing more than in terms of the type of patients who are comfortable coming forward to experiment with medical cannabis. Deepak, let me turn to you a minute. You've been in the industry also a long time. Before Materia, were very involved in helping people work their way through the regulatory spider webs of Health Canada. And you were around when Ken and others were trying to move pharmacy through. But you're also on the commercial side, and I'm just curious, what are the biggest differences you've seen in the ecosystem or in the market? What is the impact of when a big brand comes in? What happens to everybody else, good or bad?
Yeah, so look, I mean, just jumping off of Ken's point, Larry, I think when Shoppers Drug Mart entered the space, it officially sort of, announced not only to the government of Canada, but also just the broader industry that, now this is being taken seriously. There is a large group here that is going to participate in this. I think on the one hand, to Ken's earlier comment, it certainly added a lot of credibility with respect to the stigma element kind of starting to dissipate. The history in this country with respect to cannabis prior to it being allowed to be sold through, the online distribution channel has really been people, cultivating cannabis at home. And so the shift sort of marked a departure from where the status quo was. And it added quite a bit of, an element of certainty, an element of credibility to the space. But we also saw a lot of other companies get on board and start to look at this market very seriously. And so, that resulted in a very healthy, competitive kind of landscape. And we've really seen a number of companies now come on board and are looking at medical cannabis very seriously. I think one of the other things that it allowed the industry to do is take advantage of research and start to really look at research very seriously. We've seen a handful of Canadian license holders start to focus on the research side of things and start to really look at clinical trials and really put their dollars behind the research elements. So it's really flourished, and kind of nourished that space to come up.
And when you say, companies that weren't investing before, have come and are investing capital and looking for opportunities, are you referring to pharmaceuticals? Are you referring just to other licensed producers? What are you referring to?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the legalization of cannabis for adult use, or what we call recreational in Canada, certainly saw a flood of companies like Big Tobacco and Big Alcohol come into the space, whether it be Altria, whether it be Constellation Brands with Canopy. But, you know, one of the big momentous moments post Shoppers Drug Mart entering the space was actually a company called Stada Pharma. And those that deal on the international side are well aware of what Stada does. And, you know, their launch into this further bolstered that element of pharmaceuticals and people that have either investments in pharmaceuticals or the pharmaceutical industry looking at this seriously. You know, it'll be obviously, you know, it'll be kind of dismissive not to talk about GW Pharma, the only large company in the space that's actually done clinical trials and actually has an NDC product for those in the US, a DIN product for those in Canada, that have launched this product. So it's really driving behind that. And we're starting to see, you know, GW Pharma do extremely well from a capital markets perspective. And we will see more of those.
All right, thank you. Ken, just before we leave and talk about Europe a little bit more, I have to ask you one question, you know, that I don't think I've ever asked you, come to think of it, is that, you know, telehealth in cannabis has been a real lightning bolt. Lots of debate, states and countries doing different things about it, considering it good or bad. This is all pre-COVID, of course. The world has changed, but you were really an early adopter in terms of wanting to make sure that you use telehealth as part of your go-to-market for pharmacy. Why was that at a time when really, you know, finding practitioners and others who really wanted to touch it was very, very difficult?
Listen, we spend a lot of time on the strategy and understanding every aspect of it with our vendors, the rigor, the quality we put on it. When we approached our patient base and looking at accessibility, and we got into this space because of our patients, it was clear, you know, we have 85,000 physicians in Canada. We have a vast country. Finding physicians that were experienced and comfortable prescribing cannabis was an issue for our patients. And we heard that loud and clear. We offer an e-commerce exchange for our patients, staffed by our Shoppers Drug Mart pharmacists. And one of the things we needed to do for accessibility was to provide a telehealth platform. Our patients are in that virtual space when they approach us. So we felt it was really important to help bridge that accessibility issue for our patients. And, you know, landing on a company like yours that provided that was an amazing bridge for our patients. And again, maybe 5,000 to 6,000 physicians in Canada that prescribe cannabis on a regular basis. So we had our patients reaching out to us, looking for medical oversight and asking for help. And we found the telehealth portal and being and embracing it was a great way to do that. And again, cannabis on the legislation side is federally mandated. So we had a national platform in telehealth really fill that void. Last March, when COVID hit, it just exploded for us. And you can see mainstream medical offerings being in the telehealth space now. So we were a year out in front of that.
Well, you were ahead, but we will definitely one day talk about pre-COVID and post-COVID healthcare for sure. All right, thanks, guys. Let's talk a little bit about Europe. Deepak, I know you're not going there as often as you would like to or used to, but I know you're there in spirit every day and doing business there. So give us, you know, just an overview of what's happening in the European market, maybe highlight some of the countries that you think are doing it right or where the biggest opportunities are. We could talk a little bit about CBD versus THC, I think, because those distinctions are much clearer there. And of course, in all those markets, it's far more federally regulated landscapes than here. So tell us what you can.
Yeah, thanks for that. So Europe, unlike the United States and Canada, has really decided to treat medical cannabis as a pharmaceutical in its true sense, which means that we're not looking at this online e-commerce business. We're looking at putting it besides any other pharmaceutical medication that would be prescribed and would be accessed through pharmacy. I would say Germany is certainly leading that charge with respect to the European cannabis market and the medical cannabis market more specifically, where you're seeing medical cannabis being available through your regular pharmacist. In addition to that, we'll get into some stats and numbers a little bit later. In addition to that, you're also seeing reimbursement. You're seeing reimbursement from the federal government in Germany of about 2/3 of patients that currently access medical cannabis, and the number is not inconsequential. So Germany continues to be the largest European medical cannabis market. Numbers this year, when you include both private and public prescriptions, are estimated to be about 220 million euros. In comparison, any other country in Europe, for example, the closest kind of second distant from that is Italy, where the medical cannabis market was worth about 20 million euros. So Germany clearly leading the way. It not only remains the largest market in Europe, but it's also the fastest kind of growing out of all the other mature medical cannabis markets. As I was mentioning, sales of insurance kind of covered products in Germany grew about 70% in 2019 over 2018. We're seeing a larger increase in private prescriptions. We've had about 3,000 physicians roughly in Germany start to prescribe medical cannabis. We're seeing about 400 pharmacies. These are bricks and mortar pharmacies in Germany that are now carrying medical cannabis. But the big thing here that we'll talk about a little bit later is, in treating this as a traditional pharmaceutical product, they're requiring that this be treated in the true sense of standards and making sure that any product, when it comes into pharmacy, goes through what we call good manufacturing practices, or GMP. So that's kind of, the gateway or the blocker, depending on how you look at it, to launching medical cannabis in that market. We're seeing Germany now have processed just under 300,000 prescriptions under their statutory program in 2019. That was up almost 50% from 2018. And in 2020, we're well on track to see similar numbers. The last thing I'll say is product forms. So we've certainly seen dried flower be a large chunk of the market, but now what we're seeing in 2020 is derivative and extract products are starting to pick up. So products like dronabinol and other kind of oil products and extract products are really starting to pick up now. And so we've seen extract distribution now get at about 15% of public pharmacies are carrying extract products, which is quite significant.
And just quickly, there doesn't seem to be the kind of political capital and discourse or energy used between whether we're going to have recreational or medical markets. The majority of the energy is towards developing appropriate medical markets. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So, a lot of the energy has really been focused on medical cannabis, and I often speak with regulators and policymakers globally around this. And what's the best answer? Should we tackle the whole beast, which is both adult use and medical legalization? And I think in market after market, it's proving that once you have a medical cannabis program in place that's well on track, that can start to then pave way for a recreational conversation. But it's very much been about medical cannabis. I think at a European level, the big conversation now is around harmonization. The challenge that we've had from an industry perspective in Europe has been that it's been fragmented. It's been different regulations depending on different European jurisdictions. There is a push towards harmonization, and that is occurring slowly but surely.
Like here in the U.S., but you may have a better opportunity towards harmonization than the U.S. market at this time. In Europe, like in other markets, as you've seen, as they get started, they tend to be very opposed to virtual health, which is ironic because one of the things they struggle with most is actually finding enough practitioners to be good at prescribing. So I think that in that sense, it's good to hear that Germany has registered so many doctors. At the same time, I think we've learned now in the last year that it's great to have a lot of doctors who are signed up. It's even better to have a small group of doctors who are seeing a lot of patients. And virtual, whether it be medical cannabis or others, is what allows that to happen, because you can see, it's one to many across large geographies. And the reason I say that is because given that we're still waiting on so much clinical evidence, what we have found is that when practitioners get to see a lot of patients, they become these small encyclopedias. and they can be a strong force to moving these markets ahead, I find. Ken, I know that you definitely pay attention to the rest of the world. I'm curious if outside of Canada, outside of the U.S., is there a market, a country out there that you really find is doing it right, whether they're just getting started or they're already growing, that you think is a good opportunity for investors to observe?
Listen, I've traveled the world like Deepak and seen the other strategies. I think Germany, I like what Australia has done. Australia has taken an approach looking at the risk profile of this drug, this plant. And it's not just about THC, prescription, CBD over the counter. It's really a sophisticated look. CBD, for example, depending on the form, the isomer of that drug, it can be psychoactive. And, they look at it from a formulary perspective of potentially prescription based on dose and form of the drug, looking at potentially what they call Schedule 3, accessible to the patient within 25 feet of a pharmacist oversight. Or behind the counter. And I like that approach. We're starting to look at that in Canada as we're looking at natural health products. And, Commonwealth countries look at it that way. They have an assessment on the risk profile of the drug. So I've liked what Australia is doing.
It's interesting just listening to you guys talk about Europe, Australia. We're talking about Canada and the US as if kind of Asia doesn't exist, but there are a few people living there. And one day I imagine hopefully we'll be back on a call talking about that. Deepak, you started to touch a little bit on standards and how those are really, the drivers to how these markets are evolving, what people have to pay attention to, whether it be manufacturing or otherwise. Talk just a little bit about what those core components are, and then maybe help us think about how those type of standards could be disruptive to a market like the US one day.
Yeah, so one of the big things jumping off my comment with respect to GMP earlier is, that's the gold standard when it comes to pharmaceuticals. You want to put anything into a pharmacy, you go with good manufacturing practices, and there's no debate, there's no negotiation. That's sort of what you need to have before you can launch a pharmaceutical product onto most mainstream markets. What that's very quickly taught a number of Canadian players is that they need to make sure that they are compliant with GMP. And so, Tilray really became the first company to kind of go down that path, and since then we've seen about 8 or 10 companies in Canada and another 4 or 5 globally that have now, gotten EU GMP certification off their facilities and their processes. And that's critical when you look at supplying product on a shelf for pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical products. Health Canada, just for people that are kind of listening in or calling in, hasn't really mandated GMP practices for medical cannabis so far. They operate really to the standard of something called good production practices or good agricultural practices. And that's been the standard of the Canadian program. So anyone that's had in Canada to wanting to export or wanting to really put this onto pharmacy shelves has had to go out and get that GMP certification from a third party, and Europe kind of is where the gold standard of GMP comes in. But a number of operations, including the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, can authorize companies to be GMP approved, and we're starting to see more and more of that happening. I think the overarching theme here is, and I looked very closely at the U.S. elections. The overarching theme here is a lot of people in the U.S. are calling for decriminalization, which absolutely needs to happen from a policy perspective. But be very careful for those in the cannabis industry that are, quote unquote, selling medical cannabis today, because the world is about to shift on you. If you think the United States Food and Drug Administration is going to allow some sort of a state program to put products onto pharmacies, it's quite simply not going to happen. If you think of Walgreens or CES is going to start to put products on the shelf that complied with whatever the state regulation that you're following from a medical perspective, then I think that people will be mistaken. And from my vantage point, I'm seeing the pivot occur very quickly in the U.S. Post-decriminalization to good manufacturing practices. And, the FDA is going to go down that path. We're already seeing consultations happen. I know I was part of very early consultations where the FDA was looking very closely at what Health Canada was doing up here and how to develop that program. And I think think they're going to take this. And to the point earlier, we've seen a lot of countries legislate. I don't think anyone's got it right yet, but the US is going to pay very close attention to what's happening, particularly on the medical cannabis side.
Thank you. So words of caution to live by from Deepak. So I think that actually is probably a good segue, Ken. I know you as someone who likes to provide your opinion. I mean that in the nicest way possible. And I think it's a good opportunity for you maybe to think about, for those who don't know, I mean, you've lived in the US, you pay a lot of attention to the US market. Obviously, you've built a cannabis pharmacy business within the Canadian regs. But, if we go, you pick the number 18, 24, 30 months ahead, where do you think the US market will be? Where do you think maybe some of your brethren will be? Tell us.
Listen, I'm pivoting off of what Deepak just said. We spend a huge amount of time and rigor picking our vendors and understanding the industry. We had to take that on our shoulders because of some of the lack of regulations around GMP and those things that, as a pharmacist, I'm a licensed pharmacist in Canada and the US. And, the things that I take for granted when I dispense a drug and I don't even think a second thought about it is not the case with cannabis. So those standards or the lack thereof in certain parts of the industry required us to do a lot more rigor. Pivoting over to the United States and trying to understand where they are with this as the custodian of the 1961 convention federally, and the FDA's, slow movement after the Farm Bill and a very cautious approach. I mean, let's look at it today. There are 4 preparations in the United States that have a license to sell CBD. The 3 synthetics and Epidiolex being the one from the organic side. That's a very slow approach, and it's a caution approach. As sophistication of extraction moves forward, we're creating isolates. These are drugs. I had a processor say to me yesterday, "We're creating drugs." And I said, "Yes, you are now. I mean, these are concentrated forms of cannabinoids, and they require oversight." And to Deepak's point, I think you're going to see a lot more rigor with the FDA in the United States in discussions I've had with them that they're taking a very cautious approach. I get approached every day now from my peers in the United States how we entered into the space. That stigma is alive and well when you think about ethical medicine, pharmacy, and it takes time. And the amount of rigor that we had to go about in order for us to get that comfort level, the United States is starting to look at that. So, having that crystal ball, I think you will see the Walgreens CVS's entering this and with a much more rigor on standards of how this medicine is applied on a federal basis. One quick point, when you look at the recreational side in Canada, it's a huge different cohort of patients or consumers in that stream. We are indexed for 40 and above, 50, much more on the senior side. We are in form factors of the drug that are manufactured, consumption for a much healthier consumption of cannabis, oral forms, vaping has been a big thing for us. We're not just about flower and high THC. It's a whole different component, and that requires much more sophistication, understanding in the industry, and a lot more rules involved in it too.
Well, one of the things I will take away from what you just said, I think it's a small but important nuance, is if you're getting phone calls on a regular basis from people in the same space in the U.S., that should tell us something at least, notwithstanding that we still have a long way to go. All right, let's switch over to seniors and back to looking at go-to-market opportunities here for everybody. I think that since there has been legalization of any kind of cannabis, we've all sat around and talked about the seniors opportunity as perhaps the biggest one, but ultimately maybe the most difficult one to scale in. And in this sense, I can say again that one of the silver linings that of the pandemic, if we can use that expression around it, is that it has forced seniors to digitalize their life. It has forced them to have Zoom on their phones to talk to grandchildren. As a result, in the business that we operate with Ken's group, the growth in seniors in the last year has been just extraordinary, close to 300%. And I think that it's just a combination of access, as you talked about earlier, a combination of the brand, that it's pharmacy, and people had a lot of time in their hands to think about different solutions to problems in their life in the last 6 months. And so at the same time, while we've seen all this growth, now we've had the opportunity to see the complexity of serving this market. So no question, we're seeing that this market is the opportunity that we've all talked about for years, but they're more difficult to serve. They need more handholding. They need more time. They need better products. They need better advice. They need better follow-up. But the opportunity is absolutely there. One of the things that I know, Ken, you're working on in the spirit of better, more controlled, consistent products is a big project with the University Health Network in Toronto, a research project. I'm sorry. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that in the context of the seniors discussion?
Yeah. So listen, 300 licensed producers in Canada. We're a very unique licensed producer. We've taken the position and the leadership role in standardization. And to that end, one of the things that we constantly hear as a pharmacist is cannabis was great. It started off great, and the effect doesn't last. And one of the things that we realized as our industry evolved and some of the rules around wholesale and the trading of cannabis became an issue. And one of the things is transparency and quality of the product, which we spend a lot of time understanding from our vendors. We decided to enter into a proof of concept. Traveling in the United States, I landed on a company, a blockchain company, to help us do that. And partnering with them and the University Health Network, that's an organization of teaching hospitals in Toronto and research institution and the University of Toronto. We have what we call a real-world evidence study with thousands of patients on a formulary of products that have a lot of transparency. We ask our vendors that are in this formulary to render their certificates of analysis through blockchain. So these are data components that we present to the physicians in that network on transparency of the product. What is the cannabinoid profile? Why am I picking a specific product for a specific disease state or symptomology for a patient? And a lot of rigor and transparency, track and trace, provenance of the product. These are really standards that we've put in for for this formulary of product. And we're tracking these patients' outcomes, thousands of patients, and looking at are they getting a real benefit from this product? Should they be on a different combination of cannabinoid therapy? So really robust data, patient age, all those other things about the cohort of the patient that we're tracking over their experience with cannabis. And on a formulary of standard products, and we expect and ask our vendors, you grow the product, you render that formula to us. We want consistency over time so that we can guarantee those inputs. And really, that's how you get physician adoption as we start looking at this from a physician perspective, that they have a confidence level in what they're prescribing. And it's just great outcomes for patients, right? Because now they're starting to get on preparations that are standardized. And we've taken that approach to this, and it's really taken off, and we're really encouraged by the study. And I'm pretty safe to say that nothing really like it in the world with so many patients being on some really transparent products. So really excited about that.
Yeah, as I listen to you, I also just think, amazing the things that that an industry people can do when you have, federally regulated markets like we do in Canada. It just opens up opportunities, both in terms of the outcomes you're talking about, but just even for businesses to be involved in things like this that require the support of the federal regulators you have been able to acquire.
It's a great point, Larry, and that's, having the rules and that picket fence around how we operate has been great. And we've got amazing, licensed producers here that have stepped up to that challenge about getting standards. So really remarkable project to be involved in.
Deepak, you touched a little bit earlier when you were talking about Europe, about insured cannabis medicine in Germany. When we think about the seniors market, we've seen it already together, Ken and I. Obviously, there's limited discretionary incomes in play, and certainly in a country like Canada, used to not having to put your hand in your pocket for things like this. In Canada, there are a couple of large insurers, either through unions or otherwise, who have come to market and started to dip their toe in. But really, we're very, very, very far from pervasive reimbursement. What are you seeing? What has to happen? Why do some of these big players come in and others sit on the sidelines? Where do you see that part of the market going?
Yeah, so I mean, we saw Sun Life and Manulife very early on come in and announce, and part of that was, credit again to Shoppers Drug Mart for insuring some of their employees and allowing for that to happen. I mean, the insurance side in Canada has still, as you said, a long way to go, but we have started to see Manulife and Sun Life pick up the bill here, and I think one of the big reasons is this, in their own sort of selfish interest in many ways, has been around the cost and the affordability element, whether you're covering something like medical cannabis as opposed to another pharmaceutical product that could cost you hundreds of dollars more per patient. And so we're certainly seeing that kind of trend pick up. We're starting to see more insurers come on board. I think the big one that we haven't talked about is the federal government's Department of Veterans Affairs that covers medical cannabis. And I think we can make an argument that it hasn't really penetrated on 2.0 products as we'd like to see, but it's a start nonetheless. It's a significant departure from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs that would put people, particularly veterans that need medical cannabis in many cases the most, almost behind bars and take them out of service for using even CBD products. So, important to acknowledge that the Government of Canada and particularly the Department of Veterans Affairs in Canada is starting to cover prescriptions for vets. And we're seeing, a lot of veterans come to the medical cannabis channel because A, they see the therapeutic benefit, and B, there is the cost element that they get assistance with. So, a lot more to be done on insurers. I don't think we're anywhere close to being where a market like Germany is, but there is progress happening. I think one of the last things I'll say is there is a movement from medical cannabis producers in Canada to apply for what's called a PIN. And a PIN is basically a provincial number that allows for provinces to start to look at, covering these products through what we call pharmacare, which is our provincial healthcare system in Canada. And so I think you can expect a little bit more on that side as we progress on this. I don't think PINs are anywhere close to being in place yet, but we're starting to see more of that. And to your point, I think that the gatekeepers really are the physicians, and I think we need to have more physicians start to prescribe the product and be comfortable prescribing, as opposed to specialist physicians that are currently prescribing these products in Canada. And lastly, huge data set, right? We've got well over 350,000 patients that have been using medical cannabis in this country for greater part of 10 years now. We haven't seen any major side effects with respect to their conditions. And let's get moving on that. So quite a bit more still to happen there.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say, again, keep referencing the pandemic, but the pandemic has certainly actually helped to bring more of those practitioners to the table and bring more billing codes for them with their respective provincial insurers to be able to prescribe cannabis. And as a side note, what's rewarding is just to see more and more of them not really concerned about whether they're going to get into some kind of trouble, and really more concerned about, am I providing advice rather than just authorizing someone to go buy it. And so I think that's just another indicator of the maturity of the Canadian market that we don't quite see elsewhere yet. So let's try and wrap up here. We do seem to be on time. Thank you, guys. Maybe less so in Europe, certainly in Canada and the US, there is this age-old debate. We've called these two markets recreational and medical. As to does one take over the other? Do the two streams start to find their own way? Ken, in Canada, as Deepak alluded to, we've got hundreds of thousands of patients. We've got multiple form factors. We've got research under the way. We've got lots of doctors prescribing, but we also have this recreational market and this kind of capitalistic or commercial and desire to open as many stores as possible and create jobs that way. Does the rec market, kill the medical market in Canada, or is it the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, listen, accessibility on the rec side is a lot easier than it puts pressure on the medical side. But, to Deepak's point, we have Manulife, Great West, Workman's Comp in Ontario, and veterans coverage now. We do adjudicate online, and it's really becoming, and it's expanding. And as I said before, if you look at the medical side and the form factors of the drug, they're distinctly different. What we offer as opposed to the recreational side. And those consumers on recreational side, just had a discussion with OCS the other day. That's the provincial Ontario rec wholesaler. they're looking for high THC flowers, predominant form. 85% of their transactions are in that one specific SKU. That is not medical cannabis that you see, and especially at Shoppers Drug Mart. Much older cohort, more women involved in buying and purchasing cannabis, asking for a lot more robust information and medical oversight. The largest patient base, consumer base, is that wellness. So if you think of rec on one extreme and medical cannabis on the other, what's the biggest cohort is health and wellness. And that's why, when we talk about what's going to happen in the US, I'm really encouraged. And as we're looking at natural health products in Canada, that process is just starting right now. I think medical cannabis and medical oversight is alive and well in Canada.
Yeah, I agree on the wellness piece. I do find that group growing very quickly, but at the same time, they struggle with some of the same things that a pure medical patient does, or even a rec user does, which is to find the right product, the right dosage, the right cadence, et cetera, so that it delivers the end state that people are looking for. And no, cannabis is at it's still a very immature stage as it relates to being able to tell people that this amount of this will exactly do this. So
just really quickly there, cannabis isn't for everybody, and it does have, we call drug utilization reviews, interactions. So again, having that oversight and the algorithms we run on drug interactions is really critical. And patients that are consumers or those health and wellness people that are walking into rec stores cannot and do not get that medical oversight. And that is a huge gap. And that's why they're coming to us, which is great, because we're there for them.
Deepak, any thoughts on that as it relates to the world at large, Canada, particular market, as we kind of constantly talk about this rec versus medical stream going forward, particularly from an investor perspective?
Yeah, look, I mean, from an investor perspective, Larry, there's no arguing that regardless of the cohort, regardless of the subsect, I think we all can agree that the cannabis market today, whether it be medical, rec, adult use, wellness, whatever, is only going to grow. It's only going to be larger than what it is today. More and more people, for better or worse, like it or not, are coming to cannabis to manage their conditions, their symptoms, to make them feel better. Whether it's that we can argue about therapeutic applicability all day, we can talk about efficacy all day, but the fact of the matter is people are starting to pivot towards this product, and it's really incumbent on regulators to start to talk about access. I think we've got a medical association in Canada that would not like nothing more than to blend the two things together and be done with medical altogether. So we have quite a bit of a fight there in terms of an uphill battle to handle, but the market is only going to be larger than what it is today from an investor perspective.
Yeah, agreed. So I would just add that, having been in this space for about 6 years, my thoughts are evolving on this. Many years ago, we were determined that the only way that we could have a successful medical market one day was when we had enough clinical data to convince everybody that, that this was the right product or right path to go. And we're still a long way from that, notwithstanding, Ken, your extreme efforts up north. But we do know today that there's more and more people in society, particularly we almost have left it behind as a discussion point now, particularly given the opioid crisis we went through and other, pharma segments that are showing some abuse. We have more and more people who are looking outside pharma to solve for chronic symptoms. They tend in cannabis to be around pain, anxiety, and sleep, but that covers a lot of people. Our data is still much more anecdotal than it is clinical, but the more anecdotal is, at a certain point, there's a critical mass that gives a lot of people confidence in terms of how to go forward. And the last thing I would add that I didn't really expect to have to the extent we have today is, particularly when I look at the Canadian market, is there's a lot of practitioners now. Yes, there's a lot more who are agreeing to write scripts, but there's a lot more of this nucleus who have really moved past this notion of should I authorize Deepak to buy cannabis or not? And they're really treating their patients in the same way that they would treat them with a other controlled or prescription drug. So, this regulatory landscape that we've created, medical versus recreational, in the U.S. and in other markets, we may still see some evolution of how we treat that, particularly around the wellness segment. But the drivers that we're seeing, and you said it right, Deepak, these are not going to change. The growth for demand for these products for both social use and for wellness use are going to continue to grow, and we're going to need to find a way to serve those two cohorts in ways that are safe, appropriate, and where people succeed and reach the goals that they're after when they decide to use cannabis. So with that, I want to say thank you to both Ken and Deepak for the time you spent with me over the last week to prepare for today, and the time that you spent with the audience here today and sharing your knowledge. I hope that we've been able to add some good insight and some light on what's happening outside of the U.S. and how some of that can inform what might happen or should happen in the U.S. Going forward. And I encourage everybody here, if they want to be in touch with any of us, with Deepak, with Ken afterwards, I believe there's a way to do that if you have other questions. And at this point, I'll hand it back to Lewis to manage some audience Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larry. And wow, Deepak and Larry, that conversation blew me away while I was backstage here, hearing how much about how medical cannabis access is maturing all around the world, which is so great to hear. Such a far contrast from where we were just 5 or 10 years ago. But yes, as Larry said, now it's time for audience Q&A. I know many of you have been writing in your questions in the chat and the Q&A feature. Please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. If we don't get to your questions, apologies, but please do stick around and answer the survey question that we'll be asking if you'd like to connect with any other presenters today. So the first question, Larry, is for you. And this question came in from a few people, which seems appropriate given that we're an investor group. Is HelloMD raising capital today? And did you raise capital before to grow HelloMD, or did you bootstrap this entire way? Are you muted, by the way? Let me.
Yes, and yes. So yes, first of all, we are raising capital today. In the last year and a half or so, we've really focused our business in the Canadian market. One, because as you've all learned today, it's really the most mature medical market on the planet. Two, we're fortunate enough to have such a strong partner in the form of Shoppers Drug Mart. So we've really been investing most of our resources in that market. And in the last year, our top line in that market has grown almost 5 times. Today, we find ourselves actually not very far from cash flow positive, but with a much bigger opportunity in the U.S. than I'm not shy to say than we ever expected because of what's happened as it relates to the pandemic. So today, we are raising capital to expand rapidly into multiple markets and also to execute on the vision to really help people, not only cannabis, but find other non-traditional solutions through the trusted advice of practitioners. And if anyone would like to learn a little bit more about that and the terms, I'd be happy to discuss that offline.
Thank you so much. Ken, next question is from you. This one is from Matthew. He's asking, given that cannabis can produce such a wide spectrum of effects, how does Shoppers approach training pharmacists on making recommendations to patients?
Yeah, great question. Listen, we spent a lot of time over the years educating our pharmacists in the network, in our stores, as patients approach our pharmacies all the time, and obviously on our call center, which come from the store network. We look at the current literature. We are constantly updating. I have a team responsible for that at Shoppers. We spend a lot of time and rigor looking at the most current data. We work with the researchers and the physicians. We work with the licensed producers that are producing these drug preps now to understand their value proposition when it comes to the medicine of cannabis.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. Next one is for Deepak. Opinions on the South American markets. How did they compare and contrast to some of the geographies that we've discussed today?
Yeah, look, I think Andreas raised a really good point in the chat group. 300 million people in South America. I think the common theme with respect to that market is just piggybacking off what I said on the panel with respect to GMP. There's a number of regulatory restrictions that both Anvisa and VIMA and the other regulators in the different Latin American markets are imposing, but it's a sizable market and is one that is often overlooked. I think the same principles with respect to pharmaceutical drug compliance apply to the industry, and particularly medical cannabis industry, in a market like Brazil. A very, very sizable market, a regulatory environment that is now fostering medical cannabis products, but the gateway and the moat continues to remain around GMP. So if there are companies looking at targeting that market from an export perspective, which is currently, Brazil is importing 100% of their product right now, you want to focus on GMP and having your GMP in place. And the last thing I'll say is once you've overcome the GMP hurdle, it's the stability requirement. So you need to make sure the molecule is actually stable, and conducting what we call zone 4B stability, which is what the Latin American zone requires, is another important element to making sure that you can penetrate that market. So very, very important, very sizable, and certainly some regulatory kind of restrictions with respect to that market.
Did you have something to add there, Larry? I saw you unmute yourself.
No. Sorry.
Okay. Well, this question is very topical and it's for everybody. We'll go in reverse order, starting with Deepak, then Ken, then Larry. And it's about Amazon. Amazon made a big announcement this week, didn't they? That they're selling prescription drugs. So 2 parts to this question. First, let's just put cannabis aside for a minute. What do you think about this big news around Amazon getting into the pharmaceutical game? Feasible disruption to traditional pharma, PR buzz? And the second part of the question, crystal ball this for the cannabis community. Assuming Amazon does build out their pharma delivery and cannabis follows the pharma model, as we talked about today, how do you think that will affect the current state of the cannabis industry?
Yeah, happy to jump into it. How much time do we have? The big thing today, the headline was, Amazon's pharmacy play wiped $10 billion off of Walgreens and CVS market caps, right? That's the big story with respect to the impact that this has had. Having said that, if you think mail order pharmaceutical distribution in the United States is easy, it's far from. There are a number of regulations that Amazon needs to have. I think when they bought Pillbox, which was the company they acquired a while ago, writing was on the wall that they would go down this path. But from a regulatory perspective, there's a number of different restrictions that you need to have. One of them is having a pharmacist license in each state before you can start to ship into that state. So, a number of things to be unpacked there. I think with respect to cannabis and Amazon, we've already seen the United Kingdom 2 weeks ago, where Amazon is now allowing in the UK for CBD products to be sold on Amazon. So the ship has started, the process is already underway. We are starting to see a lot of movement with respect to Amazon coming to the space. I think it's going to be great in general for the space. I think it really furthers that argument with respect to access. Is it going to come to the United States? I don't see it post some sort of federal legalization because of the various mechanisms that, Ken alluded to one of them, which was the treaties. There's a variety of other restrictions with respect to, Visa and MasterCard, and just a whole host of regulations that need to fall into place. I don't see it coming to the US, but it is starting to happen in the international markets, particularly with CBD in the UK.
Ken, any thoughts about that? Ken, can you?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Listen, I think, I've been a practicing pharmacist in both countries. It's a big change. Look, the way we do medical oversight, especially post-COVID, the world's changing. The way people, interact and shop is changing. So I think this is just one of those steps that, at Shoppers and Loblaw, we're spending a lot of time in the digital environment and being prepared for those things. We're offering our own platform for physician networks that are done through telehealth now. So again, it's a big change. What I think it's interesting is cannabis in Canada is on a national platform because it's a restricted narcotic in the world. It's treated that way. And that is the same in the US, state by state. There are picket fences around it. It's a federally Schedule 1 drug. If it moves to Schedule 2, that's a federal platform for a narcotic. And I think if you look carefully, Amazon's not in narcotics right now. That's the next step because state boards have a lot of say in that. So it's a complicated space moving into the pharmacy sector. But that being said, on cannabis, if the government in the United States moves it to Schedule 2, you could have a national e-commerce platform for medical cannabis like we do in Canada. So it's really interesting. Again, Chapter 1 for cannabis in many instances in the world, but it's exciting as we move post-COVID into the digital world.
And Larry, what do you think? I mean, am I going to be able to get into Hello MD while I shop for my dog food and peppercorns, or?
I'm just thinking about how, you've leapt, like how many years ahead here you've leapt. But, actually it makes me think of two things. I mean, in the US, we can't even, we can't ship cannabis. Well, that is not just consumer CBD. We've seen the impact of being able to ship to the door. In Canada, somebody comes to Shoppers, needs to see a practitioner. They see us the same day. They go back. They make a purchase. It's out the door that night. It could be on their doorstep the next morning. Sounds a lot like Amazon to me. But I think we're a long way from that in the U.S. The last time we were able to do that was back when California was just medical, and they actually allowed us to ship products overnight, and people loved it, obviously. But I think we've got a few mountains to climb before we can talk about that.
Well, gentlemen, that's all the time that we have for audience Q&A. Thank you so much for not just answering these questions, but for all of your great insights into the global evolution of medical marijuana around the world. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you again for everyone in the audience for joining us in this conversation. You should see a poll on your screen now. Let me actually launch that. A poll on your screen now. And please do take a minute to fill out the survey, especially if you're interested in connecting with any of the presenters that you heard from today. You can learn more about our upcoming events as well at arcviewgroup.com. Or contact us at community@arcviewgroup.com or on our social media at Arcview Group if you're interested in learning more about Arcview and our investment and consulting services. Well, thank you again for your time. Until next time, thank you so much.